Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to our first debate, and we're talking about the futures of HGVs today. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Darren Bell, who's the Group Fleet and Compliance Director from DX, and Sam Clarke, who's the Chief Vehicle Officer at GRIDSERVE. Thank you very much for joining us today, guys.
My pleasure.
So we're going to break it up into three sections. The first one, we're going to look at the actual options in the HGV marketplace, where they are now and where they could be in the near future, and chat through them. And then the second one, we'll then talk about the infrastructure required for each option by the country, UK PLC, and individual companies utilising this option. And then we can discuss, whether the infrastructure and capability is there for deployment. And in the last part, we're going to discuss whether the market will be able to develop and deploy the equipment and infrastructure together with the finance to roll out the company's preferred options, like if it was DX or DHL, and also then look through, as the green transition continues, will market forces allow everything to happen, or do we need infrastructure, from the government or legislation? So, but we'll go back to the beginning. And first stage, we're going to look through the current options and see where they are, both from users and acquirers of. So, and we're looking at HGVs here rather than smaller vehicles. So if we're talking about today, would it be possible to go to full and practical to go to full electric HGVs today? What do you think, Darren?
So I've had a bit of experience dating back 15 years with electric vehicles, but on the van front, in terms of the commercial sector in regards to HGV, I think it's very dependent on the type of operation, particularly around stem mileage. I can see it working currently in the ultra urban and urban, where that mileage and that infrastructure exists in abundance, or so to speak. I think for long stem mileage, like our line of Willington central hub operations, where we're coming from Plymouth, from sort of Edinburgh, Glasgow into a Midlands central hub, it's not there for us now. So we have about 110 currently electric vans on fleet, but at the moment I'm waiting for the step change. Now, a couple of years ago, when I looked into the viability of this, there was expected big things on solid state. I expect Sam would probably have some better and more current updates than I. But solid state batteries were looking to go into sort of mass adoption in 2025. That still seems a little bit muted. I still think we're several years away from its integration into commercial applications or HGV. And I think really that step change is what's required to give confidence in long stem mileage operations, that it's a viable option at this stage. I think the price point equally has got to come down, as well as, I know we're going to talk about that in the next segment, David, but the infrastructure is going to be key on that draw where you've got mass adoption at certain depots. I know those would be Sam's speciality, but for me, it's very much a wait and watch to see how the market develops that technology. Rachel Reeves yesterday, the Chancellor, admitted some key infrastructure work going on, a little bit light on touching major industry, fleet industry particularly, on where that advancement and recognition is going to come. But certainly it's on the wait and watch list for me, because there's an absolute cost to early adoption. I've been at the sort of bleeding edge of that early adoption on vans, and the costs at the moment in a single digit margin business is quite prohibitive.
Okay, thank you. And Sam, talk about full electric HGVs. What's your thoughts on where we are and where we're heading?
Yeah, I mean, Darren makes some really good points, and I think he's right in his approach as well, particularly from the sector that you're operating within. You do have to wait and see what happens, and the EV fleet that you've got in the smaller size obviously will give you a good learning curve. I've had a career of being a pioneer of pain, so I'm kind of the forward thinking that I need to get on with stuff and get it done now as much as possible, or at least find methodologies by which we can do that. And that's not for everyone. That's not for DX just yet, and I understand the reasons why. But we have got opportunities, and I know we're going to talk about levies and things perhaps a bit later, but one of the projects I currently run, I'm not particularly au fait with the HGVs, if I'm totally honest. EVs I know a little bit about, but I've been spending the last couple of years merging those two things together. So one of those opportunities is a project that I run called the Electric Freightway, which is a a ZHID, Zero Emission Heavy Goods and Infrastructure Demonstrator Program, part funded by government, to try and be the catalyst to make people like Darren feel more comfortable in trying to get vehicles on the road. And in that regard, it's a big project. It's £62 million worth of government funding, so it's not small. And what it's enabled is the likes of Amazon and Samworths and AF Blakemore and Maritime and Kern and Nagel and all these other big companies, Raw Mail, there's so many big ones, I forget the names of them all, but they're all doing something in terms of getting some trucks on the road and finding what the lowest hanging fruit is. And a lot of that, like the van routes, are back to base. Where can you mitigate that stem mileage that Darren mentioned before and be able to run these vehicles effectively and more cost effectively, notwithstanding the fact that comes with some grant funding, which softens the blow at the moment while the capital cost is high. But already we've been going now about a year and a half. We've got 142 trucks ordered. About 10%, 20% of those are now on the road. And some of those hauliers have already started saying to us, and it's the beginning, right? But it's the thing to think, well, we want to start looking at trunking routes now. So they've done the short haul stuff. They've proven that it works. And now they want to see how they can stretch it. And again, to Darren's point, and the company I now work for, GRIDSERVE, is all about the infrastructure, which enables that to happen. So my time has spent, most of my time at the moment is working out the best way and the most strategic place to put high power charging on the motorway service area networks in particular, that enable the people to have the comfort of stretching those distances a bit further. And then we'll get into a zero emission world of the future, which reduces the massive amount of CO2 emissions that transport, or EHGVs in particular, create on the UK roads. So we've got to start somewhere, I guess, is my point. I understand Darren's more conservative approach, and I'd be the same in his shoes. But similarly, we do have to crack on and get stuff done in this sector, otherwise it will never happen.
Yeah, and that's the idea of this, really, is to talk about where we are, where we go, how things change, and can we change it ourselves by the market forces, or does it need to be driven? And you mentioned, Darren, a solid state battery. To be honest, I don't know a lot about that. Is that a game changer when it comes?
Yeah, what it essentially is doing, it's probably doubling range and doubling charge times. That's what it was sort of pitched at initially a good few years back. The likes of Nissan and others are investing in that technology. I think it's still quite new and under development. I think when that's deployed at some form of scale, which can see mass adoption, and I do believe cars clearly first will come in and use the application of solid state, but it still seems a little bit dragging its heels from where they were pitching it a couple of years ago, saying it's going to be mass rollout 2025. I know the manufacturers is going as fast as they can. I think supply chain, as well as the emerging technologies, is still gearing up for that. But certainly, I do absolutely believe that will encourage, to Sam's point, more mass adoption where you've got extended range requirements, and that would support that. And it's also the turnaround times as well, when it's going back from, let's say, from depot location, transit to its hub, having that ability and that infrastructure in place to do the return leg as well, without impacting too much on drivers' hours and operational commitments of the vehicles themselves.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Sam?
No, I agree. I think what I'm encouraged by is that electric vehicles have been around for 150 years, right? The principle hasn't particularly changed. It's a battery and a motor. There's lots of other technologies. There's lots of other involvement in fuel-based propulsion, whether that be CNG, biodiesel, hybrids, synthetic fuels, etc. They all have their place. What I like about EVs is we're talking about the technology just in the battery, and that will continue to get better, and it already is, right? The battery density is improving. The power that these vehicles can take is improving, and the type of battery technology, whether that be solid state or others, it's constantly evolving. But the principle is still the same. It's still an electric truck. It's just getting a more dense, lighter battery, which enables greater payload, etc. But the principle of the vehicle is the same. And so there's only really one component that needs to continually evolve, and which is the battery. And that can support us for a long, long time into the future without burning anything. And so that's the thing I think I take greatest encouragement in, is that the technology is at a stage where we can definitely do things right now, today, on the lowest hanging fruit in people's operations. But the same principle, the same technology in a few years' time will be able to do the long haul stuff as well, without a huge paradigm shift in the type of vehicles that are required. So it's one of the reasons why I'm a big EV advocate, because I just see that battery technology is the one component that needs to evolve over time. The rest can stay the same, and over time we'll be able to get to an emission-free solution.
No, thank you. And you answered one of the questions I had, was the physical weight of batteries. Was that a prohibitor for HGVs? Because, you know, my understanding is that they're very heavy, so obviously that takes away your payload, which you mentioned there, Sam. So if they do, you mentioned that as they're developing, hopefully they'll become more efficient, but also hopefully, you know, less weighting, which gives more, you know, capacity, doesn't it, for the shippers? Right here, right now, Darren, is the weight of the batteries an issue at all in small vehicles or large vehicles?
It certainly is a factor on van, moving up to 4 ton, and obviously the license and training requirements around that. I would suggest that in the HGV, it's very much going to be sort of industry segment dependent. If you're in aggregates, yes, it's going to play a huge role in terms of that weight. Where your current parcel, sort of general freight, depending on payload, typically I think it's lesser of a concern than it would be in a small van, just by the gulf in weights carried themselves. So I wouldn't, on the basis of weight, discount EVs in terms of on truck. But again, it's price point, availability and range for me, not necessarily the piece around sort of payload. That does very much come into play on vans, but in truck I see it slightly differently.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we said we'd go through the different options. So so is there, you know, the next one on the list I've got sort of CNG, like compressed natural gas. Is that out there at the moment, past its day, not developed? Where is that in your opinions, both guys?
So CNG, when I was working head of fleet at Veolia, we put CNG into our Westminster contract at the time with Veolia on the waste vehicles. As far as the technology, it's fine, it works, the emissions are great. Again, it all boiled down into that infrastructure piece where, you know, you're digging up roads essentially to get that mains gas supply to fill these tanks. And these tanks are quite unwieldy and large at this moment in time, depending on fleet size and utilisation. So again, it's quite cumbersome. I think the initial front end infrastructure, getting that mains gas supply into the depot of choice, I think that's still quite constraining. But operationally, once the vehicles and you've got that infrastructure in place, I think it works.
Good, okay. And you know, any thoughts on that, Sam?
No, this line of question is going to be a bit further afield for me, David, to be honest.
It's not a problem.
But I agree with what Darren said. Yeah, I mean, it does require that infrastructure and the refueling networks, and you know, it needs to be produced, you know, sustainably. Like many of the examples I think we're going to talk about, you know, a lot of it requires quite a lot of energy generation just to get to the point of being able to refuel the vehicles, and that energy needs to come from somewhere. It needs to be sustainable, and that's one of the key things for all these different types. I do feel, you know, I feel strongly that they are bridging gaps and they're needed. But you know, anything that's burning stuff ultimately needs to stop. So there is a place, but there also needs to be a long agenda that says it needs to be fully sustainable with zero emissions in at the end of the day.
Definitely, yeah, and also, you know, you could almost have a different debate about whether it be electricity or gas. You know, how is it, you know, produced, where does it come from, and how green it all is. And that's for a whole different debate by other people. Next one I've got on the list is HVO biodiesel. Any thoughts on that, Darren?
Yeah, so it's really topical for us, David, in that I've switched 100% to HVO in the last 2 weeks at our central hub bunkered fuel site. And typically we sort of consume about 3 million litres of fuel at that one site. That's our trunking focal point. And again, relates back to that kind of stem mileage into our sort of our network of depots dotted the width and length of the UK. So interestingly, it is only costing us 116k more on that sort of £3 million spend to switch to HVO. Now, the green credentials in terms of our ESG reporting, just by switching that one bunkered site alone is the equivalent of running 550 electric vehicles. Now, I know I think it's a short-lived, I think it's a temporary move to lower emissions. I don't think it's the answer going forward. There are still concerns around where it's sourced from and how it's sourced, what it's made from, deforestation and sort of utilising land mass for the production of particularly palm oils, which seem to be very damaging of concern. But I think in terms of reducing that NOx, which is that sort of sits at ground level, which is that nasty gas that we all don't want to be breathing, I think it serves a purpose. But I only see that as a gateway into future technology, into lowering emissions. So it does a here and now. And the beauty of that, we switched that on within 2 weeks of green commercials to getting tanks cleaned and filled. So we are committed to our ESG reporting. We are trying to do what we can, but equally, it's got to be operationally and commercially viable. And when you're a single-digit margin service sector business in our field, that cost of early adoption that I spoke to before is key in making those commercial decisions. But it gave us a great sort of launch pad without going into other major infrastructure projects whereby it was a simple switch. Our manufacturers, most of our vehicles, well, our average age is 3.1 years of age across all our commercial vehicle fleet. So the engines are compatible. We've taken HVO endorsed by our manufacturers. So it's been a really quick win. I don't think I see the sustainable future in HVO. But I certainly think it can do its part in the UK at the moment in the commercial sector in lowering immediate emissions, particularly around NOx.
Thank you. And again, that ties into what you were saying, Sam, about, you've got an end game that want to be as green as we can, whatever the ultimate answer is and however it works out. But, there'll be transition periods that you're making adaptations and changes, all headed towards the correct direction, because we've all got pressures by political pressures, wanting to do the right thing as human beings, but also your customers that Darren will be saying to you, look, show us your green credentials, because they want the green credentials. Maybe they don't want to pay for them, which we'll come on to later, but they want the green credentials, and we all want to do the right thing by everyone. Okay, thanks for going through that. Compressed natural gas.
So that's India, just sort of kind of on that sort of Veolia piece around that in Westminster. Okay. So again, it's infrastructure driven on that. It's very costly to dig up sort of main roads and junctions, particularly in the urban environment, for those mains gas pipes to get where they need to be. And at the moment, it's an option, but I'd say that's probably low down the pecking order for most in the commercial HGV sector, unless you've got access to that supply and resource. I think it's quite cost impeding, I would suggest.
Okay, and the next one I've got is synthetic fuel like e-diesel and e-gasoline, and I know nothing about them. Are they in actuality or perception?
Are we talking really sort of about biofuels and the additives into traditional sort of diesel? I mean, that blended rate they're doing, I think it plays a part, David. But I guess the main sort of operators in that space, it's down to them to market out and get the price points right. Again, it's every little helps, I believe, from an ESG and sort of CO2 and certainly all those nasty gases. If we're reducing it, it's got to be a good thing. But I think it plays a very small part ultimately.
Oh, okay. And I saw the next one's going to be hydrogen. And I saw an article about JCB, had something, £100 million development last week, but obviously. And is hydrogen something that's out there at all at the moment? It's practical, or could be a solution? And maybe I'll ask you first, Sam, and then we'll come back to you, Darren.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to touch on the biodiesel and the synthetic fuel one, I think let's be honest, EVs are not going to be here immediately overnight, right? It's going to take time. So anything we can do to bridge that gap in the meantime, I think is a good thing. And we can convert existing engines and find methodology by which to do that. Then why not? But also, I think Darren made a really good point about about where it's being sourced from. I think the aviation industry might be wanting quite a lot of this stuff, which might create, greater demand in that sector and therefore push prices up for those in the transport sector. So, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. As far as hydrogen is concerned, I went to a decarbonisation summit for the last 3 years and spoke at all 3 years. And 3 years ago, hydrogen was a sort of 50-50. People were saying, oh, that's what we need to wait for. 2 years ago, everyone was a little bit skeptical about it. And then this last year just gone, it was the butt of jokes with all of the Slido messaging and stuff that came up, and it's a technology which is rapidly demonstrating not being viable on the roads of the UK. I mean, cars and vans are pretty much gone now. And I think trucks is the next one that people are beginning to realize it's just too price prohibitive. It's far, far too inefficient to generate the energy to only convert it back to electricity in the first place. And with the emergence of EVs getting better, the gap between that range capability and EVs is slowly but surely reducing. The investment required, the billions, if not trillions of pounds required to put a viable hydrogen refilling solution in place, whilst hydrogen truck companies are going out of business, means that it's just economically not the right application, in my humble opinion. As pure and clean as it seems in principle, the commercial viability, and Darren said twice now, quite rightly, he's working on single-digit margins. Hydrogen is going to put you in double-digit loss very, very quickly, and that's just not going to be sustainable from a commercial perspective.
But conversely, all my anecdotal conversations in my recruitment business, talking to logistics, which I do every day, the same feeling is about electric vehicles at the moment, about the cost to buy, the depreciation of them. I'm not challenging what you say. It is a mass, whichever option we go, there is a massive cost and change, premium or cost that needs to be dealt with or sorted out over time. So it's very
that's absolutely true, David. But similarly, in the defence of EVs again is that, and I've used the phrase myself, lowest hanging fruit. Right, there are things that, and DX are already doing it in their smaller vehicles. There is plenty of everyone's fleet that could be electrified today. To try and hydrogenize a small proportion of your fleet is going to cost you a small fortune, but and there's no guarantee that's the right strategy to go forward. Yeah. Whereas everybody can do a little bit with EV today, and if that's where they start and where the learning comes from, then let's get on with it. Let's do that. Let's do the lowest hanging fruit and sort that, and that can be done today. And we don't have to speculate for the next 10 or 20 years as to whether technologies like hydrogen are going to be cost effective, because by that point we've missed the boat. Right, it's too late.
In the interim bit, any option for sort of hybrid HGVs, does that exist or work or not? Darren?
Well, I think it does work. It could work to a degree if you could switch to battery, certainly when you go into ULEZ or where these cities require low emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles to go into. I think it could work. I think potentially it would give you the operational viability in terms that you've got a stem mileage function there, and then that is switchable into these low emission zones. Potentially could work. So if I can just go back to the point raised on the hydrogen, and I know what Sam says there. For me though, there was some interest in exploring, not to trial, but certainly just following the research and the science on that. At the moment, I think if you could utilize hydrogen on your stem mileage, it would work, but it just goes back to Sam's point about cost. There is absolutely a slack handful of HGV hydrogen refueling points across the strategic road network. And unless it seeks major investments from the private sector and governmental funding, unfortunately, it's a technology I just can't see progressing, albeit I think in terms of an alternative to EV on long mileage routes, it is the only alternative I see, unless you're using alternative fuels, i.e. HVO, to low emissions, but it doesn't get you to zero emissions. So it needs mass investment, like Sam says, but it would be one that I'd be curious to see develop and get that price point range. Certainly for our trunking network, it could work, but again, with sporadic or virtually zero availability in terms of infrastructure, on the SRN. I think it's going to be a massive operational constraint to plan that into your routing.
Great, and thank you. Okay, well, look, guys, thank you very much. I think that completes the first part of what we're doing, and that's really good. And then in the second stage, we can look at the infrastructure required for the various options, both by the country and the individual companies utilising the options. So thanks for that. We shall see you all shortly.